Uh-oh.
In her last two fights. Good way hitting him from that way down.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this.
Yes.
The continued fallout of Keith Thurman's withdrawal from what was supposed to be the Tszyu fight, a little over 2 weeks from now. Boxing insider Rick Glacier said Keith Thurman will be 36 in November, inactive for 25 months and counting. Serious inactivity over the last 6 years. A reputed shoulder injury really made himself irrelevant, and now there's a credibility issue as well. Who would trust him? The reality is, Thurman is done.
He's been done.
I don't actually believe that Keith Thurman is injured, even though there's reason enough to believe that. I don't actually believe he's injured. I believe what they're doing is pulling the old switcheroo on Tim to pry that WBO title away from him, though on the premise that he is injured, and it's genuine. It all means the same thing, doesn't it? On this kind of schedule, a boxing career can't have any momentum. It can't have any traction, any footing.
So if the injury is real, is that supposed to be better?
If it's real, all it means is that he's an injury-prone fighter who's quasi-retired and barely fights. All but done at the top level. In truth, was Keith Thurman ever elite? His claim to fame is calling out Floyd Mayweather, beating Sean Porter, who was already beaten before that by Kell Brock,
Is that supposed to be a big deal?
beating Danny Garcia,
Is that supposed to be a big deal?
being a unified champion for all of 2 seconds.
Is that supposed to be a big deal?
Unified champion. Daniel Roman was a unified champion. MJ Akhmadaliev was a unified champion.
Is that supposed to be a big deal?
Yanni Bekalam-Kanalai here today is a unified champion. Are we to believe that Keith Thurman is somehow better than those fighters? Set apart, special, because he's got a big fucking mouth? America's affinity for big talkers that are not actually big doers. Keith Thurman has been done at championship level for years now, though in true PBC fashion, I don't actually expect this to be the end. Just last year, we saw two 40-year-olds in Andre Berto and Robert Guerrero return to action for a rematch that no one asked for.
Andre Berto's the only fighter that I can think of that was out longer than Keith Thurman. He hadn't fought in roughly 5 years.
So when I think about that, and then I think about Keith, this may not be the last we see of Keith Thurman. The PBC's lack of quality control and their aging stable of fighters that range from guys in their mid-30s to guys in their early 40s. Guys with no momentum, no traction, no buzz.
No future!
They can still use him. They still might. I mean, Errol Spence Jr. hasn't retired, right? He hasn't called it a career in spite of the demoralizing beating he suffered at the hands of Terrence Crawford. Perhaps what they can do is make a fight between former champions, Errol Spence Jr. and Keith Thurman. For Errol, at this point, Keith would have to be the safest option.
You can't put Errol Spence Jr. in there with any live bodies. At 154,
Keith is cannon fodder at this point. For any inspired fighter anywhere in between 147 and 154,
injury or no injury,
I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that somewhere down the line, sometime later on this year, Errol Spence Jr. decides to rebound off his demoralizing loss to Terrence with a former champion in Keith Thurman. I don't actually think he's done.
It's the PBC way. Wait too long to do a fight. Wait till one or both guys lose.
Wait for the fight to go stale, then do the fight, and tuck it behind a paywall.
Years after it's lost all its sizzle. It's the PBC way.
Conjunction with recent events and what is an evolving story, veteran boxing scribe Dan Raphael said, per source, Brian Mendoza, who is now on the Tszyu vs. Fundora card against Bohachuk, in a free view prelim for the WBC interim title, has been on standby all along in case he was needed for the show. He's been in training, medicals in order, on weight, and sparring Tszyu. He'll be ready.
Did you catch that?
Brian Mendoza has been on standby all along, all this time.
And he's on weight.
It's almost like the event coordinators knew that Keith Thurman wasn't going to make it to the fight. It's almost like the event coordinators had this planned all along, with contingencies. The United Nations' own Abraham Gonzalez said,
The United Nations? He's in the United Nations?
No, I made that up. I wonder if Prime Video knew about the potentiality of the event switch from Thurman Tszyu to Tszyu against someone else for a little while now, and therefore held off on really promoting the event hard because of it.
Does that account for the lack of promotion this show has received?
It's one way to explain it. I mean, it's not like Amazon Prime was marketing this fight to their subscribers. All we've seen in terms of marketing are glorified Zoom calls passed off as press conferences via YouTube.
Mendoza versus Bohachuk is not a bad fight.
No, it's a good fight. Bohachuk is an action guy. Brian Mendoza is an action guy.
Brian's still coming off that one-sided loss to Tszyu.
The whole thing is a mess. Even if the fight is all right, it's a mess because here you have Brian Mendoza, who was WBC interim champion, coming right off a loss, a one-sided loss, and he's being afforded a WBC interim title shot.
For the title that he just lost.
And the guy that he beat, the guy that he knocked out, he's getting a shot at the full title.
2 titles now.
There is no quality control over there. No bar of standard. You can argue that Mendoza versus Bohachuk might have a pleasing aesthetic, and Tszyu versus Fundora may have a pleasing aesthetic.
But there is something to be said about the both of those guys getting title shots.
And Lou DiBella said it. No issue among boxing media and fans that a kid off for a year after being slept cold by a guy who Tszyu has since beaten up is fighting for 2 major title belts on pay-per-view in a fight that defies the typical boxing rule that you don't immediately get rewarded for being knocked the fuck out.
You do it to PBC.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. This is intended to be their kickoff show, their kickoff card on the Amazon Prime platform, and they were scrambling desperately to salvage what little was there.
Yeah.
DiBella continued, Fundora is a good substitute, by the way. Doesn't make him a guy who should now be sanctioned for 2 world title belts. Pay-per-view is fine because it's your decision to buy or not. And most people won't. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Even if Keith Thurman did make it to the show and did make it to the fight, people weren't going to buy that anyway.
You think they're going to buy this?
No. And in terms of marketing and promotion, this is the most news and the most attention that this card has gotten. Keith Thurman's withdrawal is getting this show more coverage than it's gotten since it was announced.
And what is an evolving story.
This is the most that this card has been talked about, and it's not in reference to how good it is.
But all the changes they now have to make.
Assuming these even are last-minute changes and this wasn't all planned, preordained with Tszyu none the wiser, because I still think they're trying to set him up.
I don't trust these people.
Can you really trust anybody in the sport of boxing? You've got to look at these situations on a case-by-case basis. DiBella continued, why does no one in boxing ask why a vacant interim title fight is being contested on a show headlined by the vacant World Championship of that same weight class and governing body? That's just ridiculous. Utter fuckery. Let's sell some more belts.
That's what they're doing.
That critique directly addresses the World Boxing Council's proliferation of trinket titles, secondary titles. It doesn't make sense. If the full title is being contested on that same show, of what use is there to crown an interim champion on that same show as well? And all it really is the WBC keeping as many titles in circulation so they can collect sanctioning fees from that many more fighters. It's just like Lou DiBella said. They're selling belts.
Bosnia's own Michael Montero.
Michael's not from Bosnia. He's Italian.
Right.
Why did Fundora get the Tszyu fight rather than Bohachuk? What are your thoughts, everyone? I certainly have a few opinions on the matter. You will notice that Sergei Bohachuk is coming off a win. Sebastian's coming off a loss, a knockout loss, but he's the one who gets the title shot.
Are you starting to understand why I think they're pulling the old switcheroo here?
Sergei is coming off of 5 consecutive wins, 5 consecutive knockout wins, whereas Sebastian he got knocked out.
Why is he getting a title shot? Why isn't Sergey?
Because Sergey's not a PBC fighter. Sergey is with Tom Loeffler. If Sergey were given the shot and by some chance he were to win, the PBC don't benefit from that because he's not a PBC fighter.
Making it seem all the more convenient that Keith Thurman got injured just a little over 2 weeks out from the fight, and another PBC guy is standing in his place.
The silver lining in all of this is that Terence Crawford now comes into the frame. Yes, Terence Crawford, who has now used his status as WBO Super Champion to automatically become the mandatory challenger for Tim Tszyu's WBO title. Crawford is WBO mandatory for the Tszyu versus Sebastian Fundora winner on March 30th. And we know that Paco Vericel, president of the WBO, has already stated there's a deadline for the winner of that fight to fight Terence Crawford 180 days after Tszyu versus Fundora.
The clock is ticking.
What I like about the situation, really, the only aspect of the situation that I do like is Terence Crawford didn't make a lot of noise. He didn't make a lot of waves behind the scenes. He filed his paperwork.
He did what he had to do. Now he's in position.
All Tim Tszyu's got to do to make it to that fight, all he's got to do is stay in character and take care of business against Sebastian Fundora, who's been out for all of, if not most of, a calendar year. The last time he saw action was in early April of last year. Early April when he was stopped by Brian Mendoza. This fight, the one he's about to have, it's close to a year later.
At the end of March.
At the end of this month. It's been that long. That much time has passed for Sebastian Fundora without a rebound fight.
And you still think the PBC's trying to set Tim Tszyu up?
Trying to is the word. That doesn't mean they'll succeed.
But they are trying.
If Tim Tszyu has spent weeks in camp preparing for Keith Thurman, then at the last minute you swap him out for Sebastian Fundora, well, that's a dramatic change in preparation. With Keith Thurman, you're talking about a moving target who's an orthodox fighter, modest-sized guy, not big at all,
to a very big guy, an unusually big junior middleweight who's not an orthodox fighter. He's a southpaw who's not a moving target. He's a close quarters fighter.
It's a dramatic change, dramatic enough that I think the people at the PBC are banking on Tim Tszyu being unprepared for that style of fighter. I think they're trying to catch him with his pants down, but that doesn't mean it's going to work.
That doesn't mean they're not trying either.
I think they are, on the premise that Tim Tszyu will be ill-prepared, unprepared for the fighter that's in front of him. He's been getting ready for somebody else, some other kind of guy.
He's got to make it past him. If he wants to get to the big fight, the big Crawford fight, he's got to make it past Sebastian. He can!
Sebastian's defense is leaky. There are holes in his guard. He hasn't fought in over a year, and when he did fight, he got knocked the fuck out.
Tim has enough power to chin him.
The assignment is slightly different, where he was anticipating having to chase down his opponent. He won't have to chase down Sebastian Fundora. The goal with him is punching in between Sebastian's punches to make it to that Crawford fight.
Chance for Tim to fight in a big fight against a big name, and a chance for Terence to become a 4-division champion, but not just a 4-division champion, a unified champion.
This fight is for both the WBC and WBO titles. I think if Tim makes it to the Crawford fight, and if Crawford wins that fight, he can cap off his career on that. He can call it a career afterwards.
Think about the WBO's deadline. That would put the fight somewhere in the summer months, say June or July.
The question is, can you trust the PBC to make it happen? Can you trust the PBC to make it happen in a timely fashion? And in truth, I don't. That's why, in spite of this news, I think Tim needs to jump ship. I think Terence needs to jump ship. Let somebody else handle it.
Go to the zone. Let Matchroom do it.
You know, assuming they're not going to do it in Australia, because if you do it in Australia, then No Limit will be at the helm of promotion. But if they have intentions of doing it in America, take it to Matchroom. Take it to DAZN. Let them broadcast it. Let them bill it as a pay-per-view. Forget about the PBC.
They're nothing.
In men's heavyweight news, the latest from Francis Ngannou after his knockout loss to Anthony Joshua, Ngannou claims the schedule on the night of the fight with Joshua was designed to make him tired. See what you guys make of this. Ngannou told the MMA Hour, listen, I think we both fight at 3 a.m. It's not like I fought at 3 a.m. and he fought at like midnight or something. We both fought at 3 a.m. What I think, something that's happened is that they get me to the arena very early. Like my pickup time was 10:30 p.m. to go to the arena. And then we get to the arena, they tell us that we are scheduled around 1:45 a.m., right? They come to the locker room around 1, and Joshua was just arriving around 11. I'm like, okay, we are fighting at the same time. How come I have a pickup time? We received a schedule, an email, and then, for some reason, I was there at least 1 hour before.
Well, shouldn't that have given you more time to prepare since you got there first? Since you got there before him?
But for the fight, at least 2 hours beforehand, they do this kind of trick to get you tired. I was like, cool. I was like, bro, it's okay. I didn't know how it was, how important that was until fight day. I have to get there 2 hours before.
You're saying that because you arrived there 2 hours before this guy, there was a clandestine effort to make you sleepy.
Why didn't you take a nap when you got there?
Listen to some music.
When the fight started, I was never there, he added, even in the first minute. I remember when I got hit, the first punch, I was more surprised about the fact that I'm falling down from a punch than the punch itself, you know? Sometimes even in sparring, you take some punches and you're like, damn, this guy hits hard, but you're all right. I take a punch, the first punch, I was awake, but I didn't really feel it. I find myself down. I'm like, man, what's going on? I'm being counted by the referee, so okay, let's take your time to get back up, take my time, get back up, and things were still a little blurry. I went to the corner and we started to talk, and they were talking to me. I was listening. My memory and my vision and everything kept going. I never came back from the stool. I don't remember from when I came back from the stool to go back to the second round.
That's because you hadn't recovered from the first knockdown.
From there, from the stool, in between the round, I wasn't there anymore.
That's because you hadn't recovered from the first knockdown.
What's boxing? I mean, what's boxing without excuses? And what's boxing without sore losers? That's what Francis Ngannou sounds like.
No, it wasn't the Olympic gold medalist and two-time unified champion that beat you. It wasn't him. It was a bad case of the Smeepies.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that Francis is now making excuses, lame ones, because that's what these MMA fighters that cross over into boxing have to do. They cross over into boxing thinking that it's going to be easy, that there's not a lot more to it than they realize, because they're not boxers themselves.
Tack on the false sense of confidence, the false sense of security got from how well he performed with Fury, who I think is grossly overrated,
Who I don't think is all that big a puncher, who I don't think is as big a puncher as Anthony Joshua, and I'm no Monday morning quarterback. This is what I told you all throughout, in the build-up, before the fight happened. There's a difference between taking punches from Fury and taking punches from Anthony.
Perception is a bitch.
You thought you already fought a better fighter than Anthony. That's what it was, and that's what a lot of people thought. A lot of people who actually picked you to win based on how well you did with Fury.
They thought they could discount Anthony. I knew better.
Now you have to make excuses.
Whose job is it to manage your time?
You're blaming other people because while you were waiting, you got tired, you got smeepy.
Another way to look at it is because you got there before him, you had more time to zone in, more time to prepare, more time to go over the plan of action. Because you got there before he did.
The difference between winning and losing is getting there an hour or 2 hours early. Are you fucking kidding me?